how you actually able to get backing on these types of programs. And I know, from IO's standpoint, they're a partner for, agencies and then clients about how to be more efficient and more effective in everything you do. I think one of the things that your C-level is also going to be interested in too is his stock price, because a lot of the C-level people essentially are rewarded based on how their stock performs. And if you look at most companies, about 40% of that stock price, that market capitalization, is comprised of their brand value. Really important part of making their share grow. I'm sitting here today. I have my MacBook Pro that I'm working on, and right next to my MacBook Pro, there's also a Dell computer. And when I look at the components that are in those computers, they're essentially the same. Yet my MacBook Pro costs 3 times as much. Why is that so? It's essentially because I have an experience that I have when I use my Mac that raises the value of that product over the Dell. Not that the Dell necessarily, the components are any worse, but the experience I have with my Mac make me willing to spend 3 times the amount. And that really is what brand value is. If I'm a retailer like Home Depot, who we're going to be using as a slight example during this deck, I go into there. There's an experience I've come to expect, and as long as I receive that experience I expect, as long as that's the experience I want, that's going to enhance that brand value and essentially allow them to have a higher profit margin than somebody who is essentially selling something that's viewed as a commodity. So I think that's a really important part to understand when you're actually evaluating these programs, and also understanding where Ibrams is coming from in terms of brand management and what brand management really means to us. It means protecting your brand everywhere your brand is, globally, nationally, regionally, locally, throughout all media. And at the end of the day, that's really what our marketing challenge is. The industry challenge for all of us who are actually executing these programs is how can we do it in an efficient way across all media? And how does that story really wind up playing out? What's the issue that we wind up having? And even in our sort of pre-discussion here, Matthew started to allude to it already. Well, we often have one message with many regions, and we wind up having many regions with many channels. And those many channels have many formats. Those many formats have many workflows. Those many workflows have many vendors. Those many vendors wind up leading to many inconsistencies because not everyone does things the same way. And then, of course, those inconsistencies wind up leading to multiple costs. And so we're trying to figure out how we bridge the gap and make that easier. If a ship leaves port 1 degree off, once it gets 100 miles out to sea, it could be miles to bridge that gap. How do we bridge that gap a little easier? Well, from an Ibrams, from a marketing automation standpoint, we really look at this in 3 different elements that come into play when we're driving sales in today's market. Essentially, the market tends to be very event-driven. We're in a place now where our audience needs to see the right message, the right time, in the right media, right? So it's very data-driven as well. And we come up with, how do we execute that? How do we make it so that when someone's seeing media in all the various formats, or our message in all the various media, they're seeing a consistent message? And at the end of the day, from a C-level standpoint, this is really about pushing a customer down the purchase path, getting them to load product into their shopping cart, product or services into their shopping cart. So, we take a look at a company like Home Depot, for example. They have somewhere in the neighborhood of 300,000 SKUs online. But they're not advertising all 300,000 SKUs at once, but they do want those 300,000 SKUs, when they advertise them, to have that Home Depot look and feel to them. So they may start off with 3 products in a banner, for example. And those same 3 products may also wind up being part of an FSI, and that FSI may have hundreds of products in it. Additionally, they may say, we have a customer relationship marketing program going, and that CRM program, they may be sending out emails, and there could be 12 products in that email that are event-specific. Labor Day, for example, is one of the ones that's here. So Memorial Day, I should say. What do all these things have in common? Well, what they really have in common is some form of content relationships. And how are those content relationships broken down? Well, whether we're doing brand advertising or event marketing, one of the things that everything will share essentially are style sheets and rules. These are essentially our brand guidelines on what our image is going to look like across all media. And if we start getting into retail, which becomes much more product specific, we're going to have product information, we might have pricing, offers, links to other sites where we're driving people into our online experience. And there could even be tags associated with different promotions for tracking purposes, for regional purposes in terms of actually slicing and dicing the data later on. Well, what starts happening now is we actually start working into our content discovery and how that fits into the framework for how we can actually manage all of these different media in one type of system. And so when you look at all of these event triggers over here, they're really managed in two ways. We have the creative management of this, which essentially are our agencies that are coming up with our concepts for our events, our studios, which are actually creating the final look and feel of those, and we have our brands, which are managing the governance of how actually everything looks and what those brand standards are going to be. And from a marketing standpoint, we have our ERP information, our CRM information, our enterprise relationship product information, our customer relationship management information, and our product information management. Basically, what these three things are driving are customer information, could be pricing information coming from our ERP system, and product information coming from our PIM system. These are all driving into our solution here and what our framework is. And again, what we were talking about before on all those content were essentially our event triggers. The holy grail here really is to say, I want to be able to create any one of these types of templates and have them look the same. And when we start talking about templates, and I think we'll see this when we go into the demo, they're very fungible. I think when creators first hear the word template, they think of something that's very static. But the reality of the matter is, if you look at a print ad, it's 8.5 by 11. That's a form of a template, so to speak, or 8 by 10, or whatever the size might be. There are always business rules in which people have to stay in. And the idea behind these business rules are to enhance the experience, not to detract from it, and to make that experience be more and more consistent so that consumers know where to look and where to find information. And so the concept behind this is when they're driving through this process, whether it's in-store, print, email, whatever the case might be, where that user is experiencing the brand, that brand experience looks the same. And the way that the Iams systems work is utilizing InDesign, we can actually house all these types of templates, which can be output into multiple formats. And you can see just a sample of delivery formats here. If we're doing something for print, you can output a PDF. If it's going to be for online or an email campaign, HTML. You might be compressing files to send them to a supplier who's doing in-store. Question? I'm sorry, I thought I heard someone starting to speak up. And obviously there's even the ability to house video on here as well. So, as part of asset management. And these delivery formats all essentially go into all the touch points that a consumer might experience. And these are just a few of the touch points. In-store, online, on their mobile phone, TV, maybe through their channel partners or their network partners in some form or another. So how do we make this happen? And Rich really started to allude to this before. Well, you really need to have the knowledge of how these type of systems work. And if you look at a company like Iams, for example, the company is people with an advertising background, essentially. 60% of the people come from the marketing and advertising background. And we're combining that with the technology to create a program that is media agnostic and device independent. It doesn't matter what your media is, it's all going to look the same when it's coming out of Iams because designers are working in the program they're familiar with. And we don't have to have all these different siloed groups that you tend to see a lot today where you have a digital group, a print group, and a broadcast group. They can be merged together in a much more integrated manner. utilizing this approach and this framework. So how do we make this all happen? Well, to the point that Rich was talking about before, there really has to be a discovery. And part of that discovery really, and while it's listed fifth, are the KPIs, right? It's really to understand what are your key performance indicators. And based on those key performance indicators, that discovery is going to drive to a roadmap, which is going to drive to an implementation plan, which is going to drive to actually, a technical manner in which we're going to actually implement that program, hence the process engineering. From a production standpoint, I think one of the things we've come to learn is that so many of our clients and our agency partners that we work with are on a treadmill, and they're running pretty much as fast as they can. So the ability to get these discoveries done in an effective manner becomes very difficult. The ability to implement these programs becomes very difficult. So if they choose, we have the resources to help them make all this happen. So whether that's the engineers that IOI provides, the discovery process, actually creating the actual the mechanicals that would be implemented in the system, we can help and support all that. And of course, the ability to support and implement the technology infrastructure. There's project management, asset management, content management, color optimization, automation, all the things that a company like IOI supports as well to make sure this happens in a way that's not only beneficial to your company, but leveraging all of the infrastructure you already have in place. So this is essentially how we do it. I was talking with Jill about this yesterday, and there's almost what I would call the tailpipe of this, the exhaust benefits. Because at the end of the day, the reason most companies are doing this is they're struggling to have their brand look consistent across all the different media. But what winds up happening when you implement this process is you really wind up simplifying your marketing processes because you're getting people to work in the same manner. And you're using a platform and a framework that's media agnostic. So you don't have to start thinking about all of the different technologies in play because the technology that Iams implements is the same technology across all media. It's just basically saying, how do I want to package that template or that creative once it comes out of Iams? The concept here, it winds up lowering production and operating costs. The very concept that there are going to be less people involved and that we're going to use automation to do more of those lower task processes are going to wind up lowering the cost. Additionally, brand guidelines are going to get converted to brand standards. And I think this is a really important point to stop on for a second, because one of the things that we see happening is a company will spend millions of dollars on their branding and their brand guidelines. And those brand guidelines get put into some 400-page book that get distributed to agencies. And because of the timing of most of the programs, by and large, a lot of those brand guidelines get ignored. Well, the one nice thing about using a system like Iams is that the brand guidelines are actually built into the templates. So they really get converted from brand guidelines to brand standards that are business rule enforced. And so you don't have to actually worry about anybody breaking those standards because they really can't. Once again, because you're simplifying the process and you're putting those brand standards into your creative process, you're going to wind up increasing speed to market. And when we go through some of the case studies in the back of this deck, you will actually see how speed to market is one of the things that happens for almost everybody as a default of this process. The concept to create content once and use often. Coming from an agency background myself and working on the above the line side and the below the line side, I can't tell you how many times, especially on the below the line side, we would recreate assets because the above the line agency was working on something, but their materials were actually due later than ours because they were above the line, but they had a concept, and we would actually have to create those materials, and they would never get used by anybody else except us. So the whole concept here of creating content once and using often is again integral to how Iams works. Another important part here is it standardizes integration with your supply chain. And if you really look at how a lot of companies work, agencies and corporations, is if you switch from one brand to another within a corporation or one client to another within an agency, you start to see that everybody has different processes. Well, if you start working with a framework that you use to implement all of your programs, you're going to start to standardize how you work with your entire supply chain so that when somebody moves from brand A to brand B, while they may have to learn the new brand, at least the experience or the process that they're going to follow is going to be the same. It's going to be standardized across the enterprise. You're centralizing control, but you're giving local empowerment because you're creating these templates. You're actually allowing people to. Well, you're controlling the brand from a global standpoint, and you're locking in those brand standards. But you're going to allow that local user to make changes that are relevant to his market. So he might be able to choose language. He might be able to choose imagery that's appropriate for his market. And obviously, you may want to give them the ability to put in, some form of text that is appropriate for their market as well. And I think one of the things that's often overlooked, and we kind of laugh at this when we go into most clients, we start asking them about those KPIs when we start that discovery process. And because most clients are working with multiple suppliers across brands and everybody's working in their own way, the ability to pull together any sort of statistics or reporting is very, very difficult. If you go into a client and say, "How much do you spend on pre-press?" They really may not know, and even an agency may not know how much different clients are spending on these types of functions, these key performance indicators, so to speak. One of the things that Iams allows you to do is track those key performance indicators, not just on a global basis, but down to the user level to see how often people are logging on, what templates are getting used, what templates are being produced. Another issue we see often is how why do you do that? And the answer often is because we always have. There's really no reporting which drives continuous improvement to make sure that that's happening for a good reason. This is just a quick look at some of the clients who Ivan's worked with. There's a wide variety of clients, agencies, and categories whom we work with. So we just really wanted to quickly walk through a few case studies to give you an idea on who we deal with and how Ibrams has impacted their environment. So Weidenmüller is a electronics manufacturer in Europe, a German company clearly. And their challenge essentially was the fact that they had 50,000 SKUs. They didn't really they would go to a lot of different specific events, and their salespeople would be going to their clients. The problem they had basically is how do we get these 50,000 SKUs in a meaningful way delivered at these events and to these customers? Because essentially what they were doing was bringing these large brochures and large catalogs with all the information in it, which of course was very costly and not very client specific or event specific. Utilizing Ibrams, Ibrams brochure builder, they were essentially able to create brochures for specific marketing events and customer specific brochures when calling on a customer for the type of category within the electronics industry that specific event or customer was focused on. So the big brand here, Apple Computers, and we work on Apple with IOI as well. Essentially, from Apple's perspective, this was really all about protecting their brand equity. Apple wants their materials to look the same everywhere in the world, and they're a company who can really demand that, whether or not it's their own Apple stores they're working with, whether or not it's a store-in-store like you might see in a Best Buy, or they're working with one of their Apple authorized resellers, which number in the tens of thousands. And so you can see overall between those different types of environments I just mentioned, there are nearly 82,000 partners. And the concept behind this really was to lock in the look and feel of all the Apple collateral, whether it be online or whether it be printed. And they really weren't terribly concentrating on increasing speed to market. It was a goal, but it really wound up being a default of how the system worked, because before everything had to be routed back to headquarters as changes were made for approval through their compliance department. Now, all the materials they send out are pre-approved, and the ability for the users to make changes within those business rules is locked down so that they know any materials that go out are going to be brand compliant. So it actually, again, sort of the exhaust of this winds up being a very significant increase in speed to market. Additionally, this is serving over 40 languages as well. And there is production savings there too. We just don't have a report on the production savings in that particular case. Very similar case study here, L'Oreal. Not all that different from Apple. The difference here is they were actually looking to increase speed to market, and they were looking to increase the look and feel of the materials that were in their salons. What was happening before is the salons were creating materials on their own that didn't really match or integrate with the national programs. And so when a consumer was in store, they were basically looking at a piece of collateral that L'Oreal didn't feel like appropriately represented their brand. So they created an online portal that's serving about 2,500 partners throughout Europe. They go online now. They create their materials for their local store, which is shipped to them. And those materials are now integrated with whatever's happening on a national level, so that when a consumer walks into the store or the salon, they're actually seeing what they're seeing on TV, for example. And what they also got here was a 30% increased speed to market, because what was happening before is the salons would create materials that went through a very complicated approval process, and the way they produced the materials didn't really still match with L'Oreal's desires, even though they might have approved the content. And this program is also spread across 22 languages. Another client who I think everyone will know here is BMW. And this is probably the most interesting one. And it's the most interesting one because BMW had multiple goals in implementing this program. It was basically to say, and I don't remember how many agencies they had before, but they had thousands of agencies within Europe working on their products and their local materials. And they really wanted to try and streamline that process as much as possible. They knew they needed to increase speed to market. They knew they needed to protect their brand equity, and they also had the goal of reducing production costs. So by implementing Iams and allowing dealers to come online and basically pick and click through these programs, they were able to create marketing materials that, again, had an overlay with the national program or the program that was happening within their specific country, region, or local market. And those programs could be executed in a way they knew would be brand compliant. And again, they got a significant increase in speed to market, because once somebody was done going through that process, the wizard of editing a program and creating it, boom, it was already at the printer or in the direct mail, or they were downloading the online files, whatever the interesting thing about Iams from a user experience is that it's a very customizable experience. I have all these different widgets you can see here that I can decide whether or not I want to view them or not. I can move them around. It's essentially giving you the ability to customize your homepage, much like you would in Google. And as a user, you could actually lock all this down so a user couldn't move anything around, or you could, let the user customize their own experience. And you can even see I can add a new widget here. These widgets essentially are defined from an administrator perspective, and the administrator gets to decide what role or what widgets a user is going to see based on role, based on group, based on country. All that content can be managed through the Iams administration side. Let's see here. And again, from a user perspective, the interface is pretty straightforward. You can see here they've got their dashboard, media, productions, and data. From a support standpoint, they can supply feedback. And here this is just a link to show that you could actually download documents if you wanted to have training documents on here. Maybe you want to have your brand guidelines attached to this if you wanted to allow people to go outside the process. But let's jump right into an end case, an end user case experience. So let's say, for example, I need to actually customize an ad. I can come in here, I can name my activity, and then we wind up coming into a wizard. And I think when you start to see how this experience is, you can see that from a user perspective, it's pretty intuitive and easy to roll through. Of course, as soon as it loads. Try and get back to that cover flow for a second. That second image isn't going to load. Okay. Well, and see that there's the beauty of Iams. You have multiple ways of looking at the same content. So here we would normally be looking at a cover flow like we might see in iTunes. If I click on the catalog view, we can see it from a catalog perspective. If I have multiple brands, we would be able to look at different categories here. It could be Iams, it could be IOI. If I had access to view all those. So we're going to select our template. And once we select our template, this is going to open up in a wizard. And I just wanted to show some of the different aspects of this wizard before I start the customization process. So we can come in here and we can actually name this specific document, how we want to name it. So we'll save that. We'll name it Michael's Local Ad. If there were multiple pages, we would be able to look at the multiple pages. We can put edit notice in here, and we'll just put a test edit notice in here so that we can see how this works as this goes through the process. This basically would be saying, I want a new picture, this document should have different choices in it, whatever the case might be. Here, we can actually see that this shows the frames that are editable. And you can see here the frames that are outlined in blue are the frames I can make changes to. But I can't change anything up here by the Iams logo. I can't change any of these text boxes down here, or click on the element. I'll click on the elephant, I'm sorry. And over here, it's showing me how many of the 3 frames that are available to edit I've actually changed. And we have the ability to zoom in and out on the document, and we'll actually use that as we go through the customization of this document. So let's just jump in and choose an image. And you can actually just sort of closing out of this for a quick second. You can actually see if I highlight the areas that are editable, on the right-hand side, the page elements that are associated with them highlight as well. So if I'm the kind of person who likes to be very visual, I can click on it here. If I'm the person who likes to sort of follow data elements, I can click on it from the right-hand side. So let's just say I want to select this image of the chairs. And you can even say here, if you use the cropping function in combination with the page format, we recommend that you apply the image cropping after the format selection. I'm going to get nutty here and just apply it beforehand. And essentially, there are business rules written in here that will try and adapt that ad, even if we resize the size of the page so that that image fits in there appropriately. But we may need to go in there and make edits to that if the business rules don't work as well as we'd like. So let's actually go in now and change the size of this page. And these page sizes could be data driven as well. And again, you can see this notifications popping up each step. Every time I click on something, if there is a helpful note that might be informative to the user, you can put that in there as well. This was basically a bunch of different databases that they had put in here to drive sizes of different ads that they were using for this specific ad. But I really want to do something a little different here because they're all still essentially portrait ads. I want to actually create a landscape ad out of this ad. And I would say that, depending on the template, the fungibility of the ad is going to be based on the creative. But you can see here that this ad is going to go from essentially a portrait ad to a landscape ad. And that it actually has recropped the image in a fairly pleasing manner. let's say I want to jump in, I want to edit the text. I don't like the way management breaks there. I want to bring it down to 2 lines. And I also want to change it from your to our brand. So let's say I want to make this our, and I'm going to bring brand management down the line. And I also, within this specific experience, have the ability to change the format of the text if I wanted to. Let's just jump down here, and we'll change the phone number. And we click Save. And we're going to see that our changes have been implemented. Maybe now I want to just zoom in and see if my phone number was changed appropriately. I can grab the document, move it around, and see, yep, everything looks good. So a couple other elements that are important to show here is we actually record all of the edits that are made. So you can see I'm in here as the editor user in English in this particular case. And I can restore this version if I want. But I actually have a date and timestamp of when I made these changes. So I can restore, and if this 100 changes here, it'll show all 100 of those changes. If I wanted to, I can also actually restore the defaults as well. And this would bring it back to the point where the original phone number was in there and the original line breaks were in there as well. So that being said, we're happy with our ad, and we want to move that ad on to the next process now. And this ad has been set up so that it would go to an approver, and that approver would essentially, they have the ability to edit the ad in this particular case, although you don't have to give them that ability. And if they approve it, it'll move on to production. If they see something they don't like and they want it to go back to the editor, they could send it back to the editor if they wanted. You can see what's happened here is that the test notice has popped up. So it's the first thing that pops up once somebody actually puts a notice in there. And this will keep popping up to each user who comes into the ad unless somebody actually deletes it or maybe makes the change that somebody's asking them to make. So in this case, we'll say we want to delete that. We've seen that it works. Now maybe as the approver, I say, you know, it looks good here, but I'd really like to see what this looks like from a PDF standpoint. I can actually click and fire up a PDF preview. And again, you can set the job options on how that preview looks. So this is set up to be essentially a low resolution PDF because we wouldn't want somebody who's unauthorized taking this ad out and printing it without proper authority or without proper approval in this case. And so as an approver, I say, you know what, this ad looks great. I'd love to go ahead and produce it. And I click to produce. So what's happening right now is the ad's actually being created as a separate file. And when it creates it as a separate file, we can make the determination, do we want a PDF, an InDesign file, an InDesign package? Do we want to create it as an HTML file, a Swift file, whatever the case might be. And you know, because of time restrictions today, we'll only have the ability to show this user case study. But if you're interested, we can certainly show you multiple different types of documents being created, from online banners to database. We can go into image insertion and cropping, how we use Iams for translation, how we use Iams for area templates, for example, as well. So the ability to actually say I have a page and I have an element within that page where I want to actually not just change an image or text, but maybe multiple elements at once and the layout within that page. So let's go into my productions now. And we can actually see that Michael's local ad is here. I click on the link to that ad, and we can see here is the PDF for me to download. And this PDF would be a PDF set to the job options that would be print ready, so to speak. And so we would have our crop marks on it. our barcodes, file name, all that fun stuff. And it will be produced to the appropriate PDF X1A specs, for example. So that is a quick overview on how the process works. You know, I could spend well over an hour going through the whole administrative side, but we wanted to give people a short overview of the possibilities of how Iams works and give everybody here on this call an understanding of brand management, what it really means from an IOI and Iams perspective, and how we actually implement that.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, I think there's some things to this. It's certainly you know, for simple templates. I mean, it works very modularly in certain ways, but you know, also a lot of our subs like having the independence of actually working with InDesign for some of their larger resizing of objects. But it certainly for a lot of things it could work out very well. Yes.
Well, I think one of the reasons that we chose Iams was the fact that it is using an InDesign server on the back end. So at any point during the process, you can kick back out an InDesign document for tweaking if you want to make some additional creative changes. And the nice thing is you can take that tweaked InDesign document, put it back in the system, and then if there are changes to, say, something like price or other sort of localizations, they can be refed into the tweaked template. So, as Michael was stating at the beginning, it's a very flexible architecture with InDesign on the back end. It's not a series of steps being localized for whatever the particular market is.
Good. I did have to step away in the middle of this briefly, so I may have missed that part. I apologize if I did, but this is fantastic. Yes.
So, I was just sort of jumping into the template for a second so you can actually see how this is done, how the magic kind of happens. And, to Rich's point, an InDesign template is uploaded to the system. Let's just say, to your point, I wanted to make larger scale changes. Now, if I'm making those large scale changes on a one-off, if I'm making them on a one-off basis, you're right, Iams isn't the place to do it. But what we really see in most companies is you really want to minimize making changes on a one-off basis as much as possible, because that's what starts to damage brand equity when everybody's going off and doing their own thing. The concept is to drive as much commonality between all of the creative as possible, so that when people are seeing your brand,
it's always a balancing act between providing flexibility for the subs who tend to feel that they need a lot of it, and providing control for the centralized governors of that process. And it's always a balancing act between the two. But yes, I agree. The people who would be buying this would be on the governing side of it. But it's always going to be a balance. But the fact that this allows flexibility is fantastic. Yes.
Well, and you had some.
And it's interesting. The point I was just going to say, Rich, it was interesting about the point you just brought up about, it's sort of driven by the governing bodies. And you know what? By and large, you're right, it is. But we do have a case right now where we're talking to a major retailer right now, and one of the problems they were saying they had is there's too much flexibility, and that our end users are struggling too much they're spending too much time on the marketing materials.
Right. I think for a lot of things that would certainly be the case. Yes. And I think if you gave them the option, to do this, it might. The effort of doing their own thing would be enough of a sort of personal cost that it would sort of drive them towards this option, unless they really felt the need to do otherwise. So by giving them a really good, easy option, that would be sort of their easiest first step to go to, it makes those other choices a more difficult choice and helps to push them towards the standardized option. Yeah.
Exactly. It makes those choices less desirable.
Are you?
I'm sorry.
They have the.
Doug, I just wanted to ask a question. When you talk about the governing body, are you saying because who is it, Luxottica or somebody who actually owns Oakley, right?
Yeah, they do own us. However, our brand is owned internally. So we have
Okay.
an Oakley corporate office and then Oakley subs around the world who are the ones primarily doing the localization. And so the political balance comes between our design group and our marketing group, which sort of own the brand internally, versus all the various, subgroups which have their own interpretations of it or their own localizations of it.
And the power that we see in Iams is being able to abstract away those different business rules so that you have creative is in charge of the creative look and feel. You have teams of linguists who are concerned about the translation in all of the different countries to make sure that that is done properly. The legal teams are just in charge of their stuff. And all of that can happen in concert at the same time rather than, the typical workflow, which is a very linear. Creative does their bit, it goes to legal for their bit, it goes to translation for their bit, it goes to print production for their bit, and obviously that's a long sort of drawn-out process.
Yes. You showed how to choose an image from a library of images. Do you have a library of text options, some tag text or some sort of standardized text option, so that once something has been translated into French once, let's say a biography of an athlete has been translated into French once, it could be re-grabbed and reused each time without the user producing their own custom text in each instance?
Yes. And you can link.
Okay, good.
And you can link those.
The short answer to that is yes.
You can link those together too. So, you can use that same piece of text in multiple different marketing materials. It doesn't have to be just for one template.
Great.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting about Iams, and like I said, I think a lot of people don't think of the fungibility of templates and how loosely a template can really be defined. You take a look at the page I have on the screen right now. It's a completely blank page, right? And so you can give, and this was for an FSI, for an example, you can give a user the ability to create an FSI or any document, forget FSI, from basically a blank page and saying, you populate all the criteria now.
Right.
And this is sort of showing the snippet functionality where they can actually, drop in different area templates within a template. And within a few short minutes, they can actually create an entire document from nothing. So I think that, I think people have a tendency to lock themselves in when they start thinking template, that there's this really tight restrictions and they can't do anything, where I think if you really start to look at how fluid a template can really be, and you could take a template like this now and you could resize it if you wanted as well. The concept behind Iams is to say, let's give people brand approved images and content and allow them to create marketing materials that are going to seamlessly integrate with all of our national campaigns.
The output for these files is generally a PDF, is that correct? So is it a print-ready PDF, or what are the various output options?
It doesn't.
Okay.
Whatever output option you can imagine that comes out of InDesign. So it could be anything from a PDF. So, like I showed in that deck, it could be anything from an HTML to a Swift file to a PDF. One of the examples that we actually have is an online banner.
Right. Would there be a possibility for like a .zip collect folder that InDesign can kick out a pre-flighted kind of file?
Yes.
Because for a lot of our like our Asian subs or our third world subs, the idea of print from PDF isn't always enthusiastically received. So sometimes you kind of have to do it old school.
So we're outputting a pre-flighted PKG file.
Okay.
So
cool.
Again.
Yeah, we once had some.